Thank you. How are y'all doing? Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you so much for coming out on this glorious Saturday afternoon. I know you all could be many other places, so I'm excited to have you here and to share with you a little bit of background about my research on skin bleaching in Tanzania and also about our trips. We do expeditions to East Africa every summer, so I'll be talking to you about that as well. And bringing up, toward the end of the talk, I'll bring one of my assistants up to share with you some of her experiences in Tanzania on the trips that we do. So today I'm going to be talking about the historical and cultural influences of skin bleaching in Tanzania, which, like I said, it really evolved out of about 15 years of research that I've been doing on skin bleaching practices in Tanzania. And I started off doing work in Tanzania that was education-based. I was in Tanzania studying this educational model called Ujamaa, or Education for Self-Reliance. And I was there really trying to understand more about this educational philosophy, spent almost a year there studying what worked and didn't work with the philosophy, and I just stumbled upon this whole concept of skin bleaching. I was actually on the local Dala-Dalas, that's what they call it. It's a local bus. It's a passenger bus for about 20 people, but they fit 60 or 70 people in the bus. So you've got people hanging out of the windows, you're just cramped in there trying to get from point A to point B. And I just happened to be on this bus and was cramped down, staring at my feet. Couldn't wait to get off of this bus. It was so hot, and I remember seeing a woman's toes. She was a Muslim woman who was dressed in a black buoy garb. Okay, it was from head to foot. She had a hijab around her head, and then her entire body was covered in black. And what I remember most significantly was staring down at her toes. She had sandals on, but the joints of her toes were really, really dark, almost the same color as the garb that she was wearing. And it was so odd that I just kept looking at her feet until the bus came to a stop and people got off the bus. I could actually, sit up, look around, and see her face. And on her face, she had huge welts, blisters, and boils that made me question, what is that? Why does her face look like this? It was so starkly odd that I asked some of the other people that were on the bus with me what it was. And the one Swahili woman laughed and she said, that's Gucci Chabula, she's bleaching her skin. And so all of a sudden I wanted to understand more about what would cause somebody's skin to look that distorted. And also, more importantly, as a psychologist, why this person would want to lighten their skin. Okay, so that was the beginning of almost 12, 15 years of research on the practice of skin bleaching. So what I'm going to be doing today is sharing with you some of the historical and cultural implications of skin bleaching, particularly as it pertains to East Africa, okay, to Tanzania and East Africa in particular. So I want to start off just talking about the concept of skin bleaching. Is anyone familiar with this person? Okay, what do you know about it?
It's a dance hall artist.
Okay, and what is dance hall for people who don't know?
It's like Sean Paul, Jamaican music, reggae, but it's the hip hop version of it.
Of reggae. Okay, good. So it's Caribbean music, a much faster paced version of reggae. He's a very well-known, popular singer in Jamaica and also in the whole dancehall community. But what's interesting about this picture? Okay, so it's a before and after. It doesn't even look like the same person, right? It looks completely different. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of different pictures. Let me skip here. All right. Who is this? All right, guys, you know who this is. Who is this? Sammy Sosa. Okay. So this is another before and after picture of Sammy Sosa. Somebody can tell us who Sammy Sosa is for those who don't know? Baseball player, very popular. And he's, he's considered to be in the hall, well, not the Hall of Fame, but he's just a famous player. There you go, celebrity, that's the word I'm looking for, thank you. And we all know this picture, Michael Jackson, before and after. Okay, so all of the pictures that I just showed you are celebrities. They're people that are in some form of entertainment that have been exposed to this practice of skin bleaching in one form or another, and for different reasons. Okay, so all three of them, there's been a lot of debate and a lot of talk in the media about whether or not they're bleaching their skin or they've engaged in some sort of cosmetic practices to lighten their skin. Okay, now in the case of Michael Jackson, we know that there's also been a lot of debate about whether or not he had a skin ailment, vitiligo. So that's the reason, perhaps the reason behind why he might have engaged in other types of practices to completely even out his skin. So even with the vitiligo, having that completely evenly white complexion is very rare to find, okay? So, and this is something that you see in the skin bleaching community is that people will engage in very drastic procedures in order to try to not just lighten their skin, but to try to make it evenly light. And celebrities who have access to money and resources are able to do that at a quicker pace and also at a more effective pace than people in the general community. So what I'm going to be talking to you about are people in the general community in Tanzania who don't have access to that type of wealth. And so what you see is a lightening of the skin that looks very different. And I'll show you some pictures of what that looks like in a few minutes. So let me back up for a second and just give you some context for what skin bleaching is. Can I just get a show of hands? How many of you have heard or know or seen somebody who has bleached their skin, engaged in skin bleaching? Okay, so about maybe a half, just under half of the room. Skin bleaching is really the application of topical gels, creams, soaps. It can also be the ingestion of pills with the intention of lightening one's skin. Okay, and people do it for a variety of different reasons, which I'll talk to you about a little bit later. But the goal is to lighten the skin expeditiously. And that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody my color will look European over the course of a couple of weeks. It may just mean that somebody my color becomes a shade lighter or a half a shade lighter. It could mean you become a completely different color. It depends on what the person who is engaging in the practice is aspiring to. Okay, and a lot of developing nations, these bleaching creams have significantly high levels of poisonous agents in them. In the United States, they won't allow manufacturers to produce creams with hydroquinone higher than 5% unless you're under the care of a dermatologist. Okay, so if you go to like CVS or Walgreens, you can easily find things like Natty Nola and Ambies. These are different types of bleaching creams. But if you want something that has really high levels of hydroquinone, which is a bleaching agent, and other types of lightening agents in them, you have to go see a dermatologist and actually be under the care of that physician. In developing nations, you've got products with agents all the way up to 8, 9, 10% in them. And that puts the user at risk because they're not under the care of any sort of medical practitioner. The creams are very toxic, and then they also include things like mercury, lead, and other types of highly toxic chemicals. Okay, they also, in many African countries, are not just taking creams that are sold over the counter, but they're making their own local concoction. So they'll take those creams that are over the counter and they'll mix it with household chemicals. So we've seen, and we've got footage of this, we've seen people that will combine things like bleach. They call it jik in Tanzania, but the actual bleach, like Clorox bleach. Pour a whole bottle of Clorox bleach in a tube or in a bowl, and they'll mix that with things like toothpaste, Colgate, that you use to brush your teeth. They'll put battery acid from the car. They'll put lemon juice. They'll put hydrogen peroxide. They'll put anything that has a lightening agent in it and combine that into this mixture, which they call mkorogo. Okay, and so along with those household chemicals, you're taking mercury and lead and high levels of hydroquinone content, mixing that all together and putting it on your body multiple times throughout the day or throughout the week. So you can only imagine, especially in different countries in Africa, closer to the equator, what might happen when they step outside. What can somebody just sort of take a guess?
Sunburn.
Sunburn, that's the obvious
extreme
one.
levels of it.
That's right, absolutely. So sunburn is an obvious effect. But then there's also a lot of internal and external effects that occur from engaging in this practice for an extended period of time. Some of the things that we've seen are exogenesis onchronosis, which is a blue-black coloring of the skin. That is what I saw when I was on the bus that day. What happens is the joints become very dark. You see it on their knuckles of their hands, knuckles of their toes, elbows, knees. The burning is very, very common, and it's not just you know, oh, my skin is aching, but you actually will see the skin start to boil up and create welts. Almost like what happens if you were to accidentally put your hand on a stove and it becomes it gets a blister. That's another example of what I was seeing on the woman that I described earlier on the bus. Some other things, there's epidermal atrophy, which is thinning of the skin. So after you've been applying these creams for a long time, the skin starts to thin. And so if you were to fall down and scrape your knee or get in a car crash, you can easily bleed to death because your skin is not able to repair itself fast enough. Some other things are some external or internal issues. You see liver and kidney disease, which can ultimately lead to liver and kidney failure and then death. And that's very common. Cancer, skin cancer, as well as leukemia. These are all other very common side effects from engaging in these practices. All right, and so skin bleaching has been coined one of the most hazardous or potentially harmful body modification practices in the world. African communities are among the heaviest users of these creams. And like I said, there's also pills that people will take. There's much less known about those pills. I've been doing research in this part of the world for, like I said, just over 10 years. And I've yet to be able to get somebody to talk to me in depth about the pills. We've been able to get access to the creams and find the people who make them and watch them make it and all of that. But people are very hesitant to talk about the pills because they're highly illegal and they also cause irreparable internal damage and death in a lot of cases. So that's something that's less known, but we're really working hard to try to get more information about that. Okay, and so the rates are estimated to be as high as 70% in some African nations, meaning the rates of use, the rates of people actually engaging in these practices. Nigeria has been estimated to have 70% of its community being users, Mali 25%, Senegal 53%. Again, these are estimates. There haven't been any epidemiological studies that have been conducted to actually survey the true rates of how often people are engaging in this practice. All right, and the rates vary widely by city. Women are the primary users of these creams. Any ideas about why women might be the?
Well, they like skin.
But why?
Because they think they're going to be more beautiful.
Okay.
And I have another question.
Desire.
Is, what are you doing to prevent this from happening?
That's a great-
What are you gonna do to stop
Yeah.
this from happening?
That's a great question.
I have a parent in my class, a student in my class that's doing marketing, and she said her mother is light skin.
Right,
And I
from bleaching.
could tell her mother does something to her skin.
Yeah.
She's from the continent.
Yes.
It's like, almost like self-hatred.
Yes. And thanks for asking that question, because I'm definitely going to speak to that a little bit toward the end of my talk, because that really is one of our foci areas, is to focus on the prevention efforts. We've spent years really trying to understand the context behind why people bleach, but now we're really sort of moving more in the direction of prevention measures. So I will talk about that. Okay, and so there has been work done in East Africa on skin bleaching practices, West Africa, Northern Africa, and Southern Africa. There's been far less research conducted on it in Eastern Africa, and that's really the focus of our work. Why Tanzania? Because Tanzania is one of the bigger nations in East Africa, and this is really the area that we have been focusing our work. So these are some pictures of what can happen to the skin when you engage in these practices for an extended period of time. This picture right here, you see on the far, your left, looks like a picture of somebody who has acne, really bad acne. Oftentimes, that's one of the most common features that you see on people who bleach their skin. It looks like acne, but in many cases, it's actually scabies, which is a parasitic mite. And so that mite burrows into the skin and compromises the strength of your skin. Also, using these creams is preventing your body from being able to fight infections the way that you normally would. And so you see things like this, which are very, very contagious. You know, if a mother rubs her face for an extended period of time and then, touches her infant or holds her child, it's very easy to spread this from one person to the next. Okay, and then the epidermal, or the exogenesis onchronosis is the picture in the middle. It looks like her skin almost has a burn on her back. That oftentimes can be a combination of the exogenesis onchronosis mixed with chemical burns. So these are just some of the aesthetic health risks. And like I said, there's a number of also medical health risks. Several I've talked about already, but hypertension, diabetes, and infertility are among some of those things. Mm-hmm.
Does this mean that they're putting the cream all over their body?
Yes, in most cases, they're applying the product all over. So, it's rare. So, and when you see this happening in a lot of developing nations, what people do when they use bleaching creams is they may just put it on their face, or they may put it on an acne mark, like a dark spot on your face to try to even out the skin. But what people are doing in many of the nations that we've been working in is they're applying these creams to their entire body. Again, in an effort to lighten their skin, to become completely light. Okay? Mm-hmm.
Is that the reason? Is it like a higher level of toxicity? I don't know the correct word. That it's shutting down their it's shutting down the liver and the kidney because there's so much of a higher level by putting it all over the body versus the face.
Well, I think that the thing is, it's just if you're using the products for an extended period of time, and they're, like you said, they are using it at great quantity. So it's going, I mean, you've got chemicals entering the skin all over your body. And so it's rare to find somebody who's gonna have skin cancer from using these products for a couple of weeks. I mean, you have to be doing this for months and years at a time, which is very, very common there. You know, people are doing this. I mean, it really is like an epidemic when you really look at the numbers of people who are engaging in these practices, and the way that they're doing it is extremely harmful. Somebody else had their hand up. Yeah. Oh.
I see you have infertility. Have you done any studies or kind of as a secondary into the tetradental effects in the fetuses? Because if women are doing this and
yes, that's a great question. We haven't done those studies yet, but that's an area of interest. Because, so pregnant women, you know, who are engaging in these practices while they're carrying their child, there's been theoretical literature that hypothesizes that that would put them at higher risk. Now, there is actually empirical literature that suggests that women who are pregnant, who are exposed to high concentrations of lead or mercury, do in fact pass those toxins on to their child. But there haven't been studies that looked at that as it relates to skin bleaching. But then you also find, in parts of Tanzania, like in Zanzibar, which is an island off the coast of East Africa that is a part of the United Republic of Tanzania, you find women who are actually putting the creams on their young infants. So you'll have a 4-month-old or a 5-month-old, they're putting these creams on their child, and they also will draw eyeliner on their eyebrows and just make them up completely. They look like, almost like artificial dolls. And that's just sort of a part of their cultural practice, but again, that's exposing the child to all different types of toxins. One more question. Go ahead, go ahead.
I'm just curious to want to know is, how is that, at this day and age, what is making the women want to bleach, you know, their children? I mean, well, from my understanding, our history, we went through this back like in the 50s and 60s. So now in 2013, what is making the women of the dysphoria want to do this?
Yes, great question.
We've already, they know us here, what we've been through. Why would you want to go?
Yes. So thank you so much for bringing up that question, because that's really I'm going to answer that question throughout the rest of my talk. That was the #1 question that I wanted to understand when I saw this the very first time. Why? Why are you doing this? I'm on the continent. I'm in the lands of blackness. Why are folks wanting to be white? You know? So that was the #1 question that I asked and my team asked, and so we spent many years trying to understand that. So I will answer your question, and if you still have questions after I'm done, please, you know, stop me again. Okay, so the characteristics of skin bleachers, particularly in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, they tend to be older, 20 plus years old. So they're, you know, midlife on up, generally. That doesn't mean younger folks don't do it, but the primary group that we found that's engaging in this practice tended to be women who were 20 plus. They tended to also be higher income earners. Now this was a new finding in our study, because in earlier studies they found that most of the people who engage in these practices tended to be lower income, lower to mid income. We found them often to be higher income earners, to be married. In the southwest regions of Tanzania, it took us a minute to really understand why the southwest region, but that's actually a segment of the country where you have a lot of lead being produced and mercury, and you also have ethnic groups that ascribe to many of them in Tanzania already ascribe to like a bride price, or almost like a dowry, where you have to, the man's family has to pay a certain price or a certain number of animals to the woman's father and her family in order to marry that person. But in many southwestern region country or cities, you have ethnic groups that will pay a higher price for a woman who is lighter skinned. Okay, so that could possibly be why this practice is more prevalent in that region. We also found the people who engage in this practice to have higher internalized Eurocentric standards of beauty, and to have political affiliations with the Civic United Front Party, which is a political party in Tanzania that is mostly ascribed to by Zanzibaris. And when I get into the rest of my talk, you're going to learn more about the Zanzibari community ethnically and racially and how this may sort of play into that. Okay, so some of the motivations, these are some of the larger level motivations that we found in our studies for why people engage in this practice. Okay, I'm starting to answer the question that you had a little bit ago. To remove pimples, to soften the skin, to be more European looking or more Arab looking, to remove the adverse effects of engaging in the practice for a long time. So after you've been doing it for a long time, you want to get rid of the dark marks that have come on your body or the thin skin. And instead of going to the doctor and trying to figure out how I can remove these dark spots, oftentimes people will just keep using the creams thinking that somehow magically it's going to make it go away. To satisfy and attract a partner. This was one of the top reasons. Okay, so I am trying to find a husband, I'm trying to find a boyfriend. I need to do what I need to do in order to make that happen, okay? And sometimes it's, I'm already married and I need to keep my husband. I need to keep him happy, do what I need to do in order to satisfy him. And it's not just about, I'm doing this because I'm beautiful or because I want to be beautiful. A lot of times it's, I'm doing this because I need money. I need resources. I need a husband or a man to put a roof over my head and provide for my family. Now, just like many other African nations, Tanzania is a patriarchal society. So men have traditional, they ascribe to traditional gender roles, where the man is the breadwinner, the woman is the caretaker. And so education is not as readily available for women. So it's very common for women to want to marry earlier in order to be able to provide for their family. Now, it's not only women who are engaging in this practice. You also have men that are doing it. And men will engage in the practice for similar reasons. They'll do it to attract a wife or a girlfriend. Generally, it's men who are in the entertainment industry. So Swahili, they call them bongo flavor, like Swahili rap artists. You have musicians, other types of musicians, actors that will engage in the practice. And then to satisfy and impress their peers.
Are the men doing it all over too? All over the body?
Oh yes. Well, meaning from head to toe?
Yeah.
Oftentimes, yes. Oftentimes, yes. It's to look like you're naturally light. And our studies, when we've inquired, to really understand why people are doing this, their goal is not to look like they're bleaching. They want to look like they have naturally become lighter. And so oftentimes they won't tell their friends or their husband or their wives that they're engaging in this practice. They want to just look like they've automatically become lighter. When we asked men if they prefer women who are lighter, many of the men that we sampled said that they do prefer lighter women, but they prefer naturally lighter women. So they don't like the women who are bleaching. They say they look weird. They have these weird things going on with their skin. We don't like that. But we do like the lighter skinned women. And this is more common along the coast of Tanzania because you're right on the Indian Ocean, and just across, a little bit across the ocean, you have Zanzibar, which is where there's a lot of mixed race people or mixed heritage. So you've got people that are mixed with black and Indian and black and Arab. And so the people on the mainland and toward the interior of the mainland are oftentimes ascribing to look like Zanzibaris in some cases. In other cases, they're ascribing to look like Europeans or like Americans, okay? So let me talk to you a little bit about the history behind what has shaped a lot of these practices. So the historical legacies of enslavement, colonization, and westernization, westernization and neocolonialism, we believe, have had an impact on these current day practices of skin bleaching. There's a need for a lot more historical research to really sort of investigate this further. But based on our review of the theoretical literature and also our empirical studies, these are some of the institutions that we feel very strongly have had an impact on current day practices. All right, the direct and indirect, instilling values and perceptions that lighter skin is somehow better and more powerful is being passed on from one generation to the next. Very similar to what we see here in the United States. Okay, this method of control has persisted for centuries. I mean, this has been going on for centuries and centuries in most parts of the African world and also in the diaspora. Okay, and so this demarcation, this aspiring for power has resulted in a demarcation of color, a hierarchy of color with light at the top of the chain. And so this has resulted in skin bleaching.
What is
Neocolonialism? Good, great question. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about what colonialism is. Neocolonialism is a reinstitution of colonialism in a different format. So it's the process of colonialism happening all over again in a different way. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So let's talk about Tanzanians being enslaved by the Arabs. Many of us are familiar. We're more familiar with the West Transatlantic slave trade, okay, and being enslaved as African American people by Europeans. Okay, there was a similar institution of slavery that took place in East Africa, but that enslavement was led by the Arabs instead of by the Europeans. Now, the Europeans came into play during the colonial era, but colonization came after their enslavement period. Okay, so Arabs were the first to enslave Tanzanians. And so in 800 AD, Zanzibar, Pemba, and Mafia. So let me just explain. Come around here. This is a map of the continent of Africa. Okay, and Tanzania is over here. All right? Zanzibar, here's Zanzibar, is an island just off the coast of East Africa. And there's actually a couple of islands, Zanzibar, Pemba, and Mafia Island. All together make up the United Republic of Tanzania. All right, and so Zanzibar became the hub of the East African slave trade. There was a huge waterway there. There was a lot of resources, natural resources, a lot of trading that was happening, and a great place to invest in land and opportunity. So when the Arab nations were in turbulent times, they were seeking settlement posts to establish positions of power. Okay, they began trading just gold, ivory, tortoise shells, sea salt. They were trading all different types of natural resources as far north as Arabia, so from Zanzibar all the way up to the Middle East, and sharing their culture with the indigenous Tanzanians that they met in Zanzibar. Okay, so they were bringing their religion, their values, their ideologies, and they were just sharing that with the people that they encountered there. A new culture began to emerge, which was a mixture, an intersection of the Bantu African and the Middle Eastern. Okay, and this is what we now call a byproduct of these two cultures, which is Swahili. And that's reflected in the language. Swahili has a strong mixture, not just of Bantu languages or Bantu words, but it is also infused with a lot of Arabic. Okay, so it's sort of a fusion of both. By 1000 AD, harmonious relations shifted to brutal domination of Tanzanians. So in the beginning, they were there just trading for, with trading natural resources, but then they began to dominate the people that they found there. They started catching on to the idea that we can get more. Once you get a little bit, you always want more. Okay, and so they started catching on to the idea that we can produce mass products if we have people to help us. Okay, and so the Arabs arrived in search of opportunities to capitalize on Africa's east coast trade. And they began trading the enslaved Tanzanians. Okay, and so instead of just trading these natural resources, they were trading, Tanzanians, people. Okay, very similar to the chattel slavery that we know about in West Africa. Okay, and that became even more profitable. That became a hugely profitable aspect of their institution, of their business. And so by the 10th century, the slave trade was in full effect, and Arabs had established a criteria of domination. Okay, this resulted in a variety of different types of outcomes. So they positioned Tanzanians as laborers on plantations, again, similar to what we are familiar with in West Africa and in the New World. They imposed their religions. They tortured and brutalized Tanzanians. The Arab slave trade was one of the most brutal slave trades that there was. They denigrated Tanzanians and forced them to adopt beliefs and cultural practices of the Arabs. And the ideals of their own heritage and culture were reduced to nothing, a position of inferiority. And so this really was the beginning of changing the social landscape, the social ideology, psychology of how these African people thought about themselves and their own culture and their language and who they were as a people. All right? So a color hierarchy began to form. And there were many institutions over time that helped to solidify this color hierarchy, but this began earlier on during the enslavement period. Okay, and so dark-skinned Tanzanians were considered primitive and inferior compared to the lighter-skinned Tanzanians. Characteristics and beautification practices of Arab women were adopted. So Tanzanian women not just would look at these Arab women and think that they're so beautiful, but they would actually adopt some of their own practices. So you started seeing Tanzanian women painting themselves with henna. That's actually a picture we took a couple of summers ago of one of the students in my group getting their foot painted with henna. Okay, this is an example of some of the practices that were adopted all the way back then by the Tanzanian people. They would engage in henna designs on their hands just for beautification. They attempted to lighten their skin by rubbing ground sandalwood on their bodies. Okay, that was a natural form of lightening that took place earlier on before a lot of these other types of chemicals came about. So that's the enslavement period. Let me shift gears now and talk about the colonization period, which occurred after enslavement. So the reduction in the Arab economy with the British abolishment of slavery occurred in 1867. So the Arabs started losing power with the institution of, or with the abolishment of slavery, okay? And the new market in Tanzania became deficient, so they weren't able to make as much money because now slavery had been abolished. All right, and so they were struggling, trying to figure out how can we continue to make money, especially the type of money that they were making before, with no enslaved Africans to continue the production. Okay, and this created another layer of power and domination because now the British started to move in and try to control things. The British were influenced by the Age of Enlightenment to bring, quote unquote, light to the dark parts of Africa, as if Africa was dark before they found it. You know, so they were enlightened. They were trying to bring light to this dark continent, and they thought that they were the chosen people. They thought that they had the social, political, and moral responsibility to civilize this dark continent. All right, and so they set up missionary schools and different types of religious centers to convert Tanzanians. They spread myths about what it means to be African. There emerged a clear distinction between the haves and the have-nots as a result of this perpetuation. There was a line to color. So generally speaking, the people who had power tended to be lighter skinned, and the people who didn't have power tended to be darker skinned. Okay, this further perpetuated the skin color hierarchy, and again, setting the foundation for what we later began to know as the practice of skin bleaching. All right, so German control. The British had now abolished slavery. The Germans were starting to, well, many of the European nations during the scramble for Africa were trying to grab on to different African countries so that they could control, okay, and that they could actually colonize. And so in 1890, the Germans controlled virtually all of what is Tanzania. They were slow to follow suit and actually take hold of Tanzania, but they actually ended up occupying that region. And so they created their own regional buffers around the settlement posts. If you go to Tanzania even today, you can see the regional buffers that they created in different parts of the country. So for example, they would separate themselves. They would find the most beautiful part of the country. Generally, it was right on the coast, right near to the waterways where they could continue to do trade and continue to have access to travel. But it was also some of the most beautiful landscaping. And so they build these beautiful castles and mansions right on the coast in an effort to create their own little Europe in Africa. And they always made sure that they were separate, away from all of the other African people or Tanzanian people that they encountered there. So they'd have these huge buildings and structures, and you'd have Tanzanians living in huts, you know, all around. They perpetuated white supremacy and created an environment that looked like Europe. And so this division deepened the spread of the color consciousness that we've been talking about, and further widened the spread of skin bleaching practices by Tanzanians. Okay, so post-colonization, this cycle continued. For nearly 30 years, the German rule negatively impacted Tanzanians through the denigration. They continued to denigrate the Tanzanian people that they found there. There was the death of 200,000 plus Tanzanians that occurred via different things: wars, murder, forced famine. So not only are you changing our psychology, but you're annihilating us through war and famine and other types of issues. Okay, and nearly 1,000, the Maji Maji Rebellion was an uprising that occurred in East Africa, and Tanzania, also in Kenya. The Tanzanian people, I mean, they resisted, just like most Africans resisted when Europeans and enslavers came in. They resisted at every stage, and this was no less true in Tanzania. So during the Maji Maji Rebellion, they took over, they rose up and they said, no more, we're not gonna have you taking over our lands and taking over our resources and telling us who we are. And so this led to Tanzanian independence in 1961 and the unification of the United Republic, what we now know as the United Republic of Tanzania, in 1964. Okay, so liberation. After they got their independence, you have liberation. There were a lot of wonderful movements that were put into play during the liberation period that ended up being reversed afterwards by our own people. And this is what happens. This is how the psychology works when you've been enslaved. When there's a saying, you know, the oppressed oftentimes will take on the characteristics of the oppressor without even psychologically knowing that they're doing that. And so we see this being played out even in Tanzania. So even when slavery and colonization ended and liberation began, Tanzanians took control of their own land. The same counterproductive color consciousness ruled their own opportunities. Okay, so if you're lighter skinned, now, you know, the country is mostly run by Tanzanians, black Tanzanians, but you still have these same color constructs in place, deeply embedded psychologically in the psyche of the black Tanzanian people there. Okay, so better jobs. Even if you go there today, I bring my students there, better paying jobs tend to be people that are lighter skinned. You have the Zanzibaris, the Arabs, the Europeans, people of mixed heritage that are in positions of power. They have the jobs as attorneys and doctors. They have the positions as the managers, you know, the directors of agencies. The front end staff are the ones who tend to be darker skinned and have the lower paying positions. Okay, but that's also the point at which they get pressure. So for example, if you're a darker skinned woman and you work at a hotel as a server in the restaurant, it's not uncommon for your boss to come up to you and say, you're too dark. If you want to keep this job, you need to do something about it. So you can imagine for a woman who is not educated, maybe she is married and maybe she's not, she has very little opportunity to get educated because she comes from a family that doesn't have a lot of money. She is going to do whatever she needs to do in order to keep that job because that job is her livelihood. That's her sense of security.
It's so interesting that you said that because it happened in the United States. It happened to me.
Okay.
At a 5-star hotel.
Yes.
And I was in college, young, 17, 18 years old, waiting on a married African-American couple.
Right.
Told the hostess that I was too dark. She had the hostess come to her, told her couple, the wife did.
Wow.
Told me to get the hostess. The hostess came over and I didn't know what they were talking about, but she told them that I was too dark.
Wow.
And they wanted that young lady over there, she was a lighter skin,
Yes.
to wait on them. So it happens. It's still happening in the United States.
Yes, that's deep.
This is around like the 70s or something like, you know, 60s.
Okay, and like what did that do to your psychology? What did that do for you as a person?
Well, first of all, I was just shocked. I was just like, what?
Right.
You know, I just couldn't believe it, and so I just like, you know, okay, I'm going, you know, it's like tripped me out. So I left for the day. I just didn't want to, you know, work for the rest of the day because I couldn't believe it.
Right.
That to me, it was the first sign of what you call colorism or whatever that I ever experienced in my life, and I didn't know that. At that point, I said, "Oh, we have issues in our community." So that's my realization. That's my realization right there.
Right. Yeah. And it's very discouraging, and it can cause you to question who you are as a person, impact your self-esteem, your ability to perform on the job. You know, and these. Thank you for sharing that example because these are very real scenarios that happen today in Tanzania, but like you said, even in our country. So it has significant impacts. Okay, and so these negative beliefs about the color and self-identity slowed during Nyerere. Julius Nyerere was the prime minister or president who led the country into independence. Okay, and so he was just a remarkable leader and is known even today as a very strong activist. He resisted colonial influence. He said, you know, we don't want your toilet paper, we don't want your European resources, we're going to use our leaves. We're going to use our own resources and live off of the land, you know. And he's also very well known for being one of the only leaders who was able to preserve their national language, which is why Tanzanians still speak Swahili so well. They're excellent Swahili speakers compared to other East African nations like Kenya or Uganda. It was because of him and really forcing his country to embrace their own cultural beliefs and values that you see the country unfolding in the way that it has.
Can you repeat his name again?
Nyerere, Julius Nyerere. It's N-Y-E-R-E-R-E. Okay, so during Westernization and neocolonialism, this is after Nyerere's rule, you had other leaders that came in. Again, they were Tanzanian. Ali Hassan Mwinyi was the next president after Nyerere. And he ended up reversing Nyerere's African socialist policy. So again, Nyerere he created something called Ujamaa, or African, they call it education for self-reliance, but it's a type of African socialism. And it really embraced the communalism. It was all about us working as a community and living off of the land and helping each other. So if you lived, if you live in a small community, let's take, what's a small community around here?
West End.
Okay, the West End. Let's take the West End. Okay, that's a little bit bigger than what you might be thinking about in Tanzania, but I'll use that for the sake of this example. So let's take the West End. According to his policy, this is one aspect of his policy. People were able to sort of create resources collectively and live together. Without everybody who lived in that community, they have to have their own job to make their own money for their own house, for their own kids and family. In this ideology, people worked together, collectively. All right, so you may have a farmer who produces maize. You may have another farmer who produces cassava. Another farmer who produces, sugar. Okay, and then you have an educator. All right, so all of these different professionals in the community, rather than just creating resources for their own family, would create resources for their own village. And so the village would come together and share resources. So you produce maize, and you give maize to everybody in the village. Somebody else produces cassava, and they give cassava to everybody in the village, until the village is self-sustaining. Okay, so that's sort of one aspect of the African socialist concept. There's many other, like political, educational, there's a lot of other aspects of African socialism, but that's just an example.
Did any of those succeed at actually living up to that standard?
They did. And so there's a lot of controversy about this because a lot of communities were self-sustaining according to this philosophy for a long time. But there came a point where people in the community wanted to go back to doing their own thing. They didn't want to have to produce resources for everybody in the community. They just wanted to break off from it. But they weren't allowed to. And so then when people started wanting to break off and weren't allowed to do that, it created some resistance. So there's some mixed opinions about how successful this philosophy was. Regardless, he's still known to be a forefather of independence.
What would you call that? Cooperative living? Or
yeah, cooperative economics.
What about socialism? Socialism is that, would you call it that as well?
Well, it has aspects of traditional socialism, but he called it African socialism, which it has some uniqueness to it than what you might think about with traditional African socialism. There's different aspects of it that make it unique, but it is known widely in the literature as African socialism? It's a good question. Okay, and so when Ali Hassan Mwinyi came in, he reversed all of the policies that Nyerere had put into place. He said, you know, we don't want that, we're going to do our own thing. And so he created more of a he relaxed the import restrictions. So before, and this is, I mean, it sounds like a funny example, but the whole toilet paper thing was an actual example. You know, so when you go to Tanzania now, most people don't use toilet paper. They use other things, okay? They may use their hand with water to wash, which is why it's really rude to extend your hand with you never want to use your left hand when you're shaking someone's hand or receiving something from them, because that's considered to be inappropriate. That hand is used for other things. Okay, so the toilet paper is a perfect example of products that were coming from the outside. It was coming from the West. And for years and years and years, that was not used. That wasn't a product that was utilized in the country. But when Ali Hassan Mwinyi got into office, he relaxed the importation laws and started allowing other things from the West to come into the country, okay, including skin bleaching products, okay. He encouraged private enterprise. He introduced multi-party politics. This is when you start to see all types of corruption and tax evasion happening. Again, oppressed taking on the characteristics of the oppressor. If you are in power, you see money, you have opportunity. The way to get more money and more opportunity is on the backs of other people. Okay, so that you see this corruption happening in this part of Africa. A lot of times it's not that they're necessarily aware of the fact that they are doing this to take advantage of other people. In some cases they are, but in other cases they're not. You know, they're just doing what they've been socialized to do. Okay, and then it lacked a proper disciplined monetary policy. So inflation became rampant. Things became very expensive. Limited regulation over imported products, including skin bleaching. So now, like I was at the post office, I don't know, this was 3 years ago, I was in Tanzania, and I was there for a year at the time. And I went to the post office to pick something up, a family member had sent me something, and I was standing in line to get my package, and the woman right in front of me was picking up her package from customs. And so when you go through customs, you have to have your box searched. They open the package, they want to see what's inside. I mean, this woman she was receiving it was from the floor almost to the ceiling, packages, boxes and boxes and boxes of skin bleaching creams that had come from, I don't know, maybe somewhere in Europe or somewhere in the Middle East. But if there were proper regulations in place, that would have been stopped at the border. They searched your package. I watched the whole thing. I was waiting to see what was going to happen. They searched your whole box, told her to pay the little fee that you have to pay, and then she went on her merry way with all of her boxes. All right, so going on with Westernization and neo-colonialism, the Western influences were preserved after colonialism ended. So not just having impacts of colonialism, but now you've got the impacts of Westernization, okay, which is basically access to our media. They've got access to the media in the West. Turn on the TV and you see Oprah. You know, you turn on the TV and you see, The Young and the Restless. And same thing with music. I mean, they know Beyonce all day long. They love, who are some other artists that they always talked about? Rihanna, okay. So they love a lot of the same artists that we watch and that we listen to. The cosmetic industry was also influenced. So you have products and ads that were made for Europeans. So when you go to the grocery store, to the market in Tanzania, let's say you're trying to get some hair products. They've got all types of hair products for Europeans in a completely black country. I mean, you've got, well, okay, now they do have some black hair products, but they're almost always the most extreme. So for example, if you're going to get some Dark and Lovely relaxer for your hair, the only one that you're going to find is the bone straight one. They don't have like mild and medium. It's rare to see that, okay? And then they also have a lot of other types of white products. So one of the things that you will see that's, and this very disturbing, I find it very disturbing, when you go to the grocery store aisle, let's say in the child section, you want to buy your little girl a doll, or your boy a race car driver guy or something. All of the toys, I mean, the whole aisle is nothing but white dolls. You don't see not one black, Latin, Middle Eastern type of doll. They're all, I mean, as white as this paper right here. Mannequins, the same thing, as white as this paper. And it's,
to keep the lock going.
huh?
To keep that facade going. That white is white.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so this has an impact on the psychology, right? Now, what's also interesting is that this is a perfect example of what I'm about. This sort of answers the question that you asked earlier about neocolonialism. So there's a level of dependency that's being created. So, for example, Europeans are, there's policies in place in a lot of European nations that they cannot sell and distribute skin bleaching creams in their own country, but they can distribute it outside. So what you find is that they're creating these products in European countries and then exporting them out all over Africa. So you've got people in many African nations getting products from the West that they can't even use in their own country. All right, and so that is a perfect example of neocolonialism, the colonizer creating a sense of dependency on the host country without having any benefits to the country that is receiving the product. So the country who is exporting receives all the benefits, and the country that is receiving the products receives nothing but a level of dependency on that host country. So that's just another example of how neocolonialism is taking place even today. These are pictures of skin bleaching creams that we took on the shelves. Now, there's all types of policies in place now that have banned these creams, yet and still you find them all over the place. All you have to do is walk up to a market and take a picture. If it's not on the shelf in the front, it's on the back shelf. And I have my students and some of the passengers who have come on our trips will go and do sort of like this scavenger hunt to see what types of products they can see in the market. And although the practice has been banned in Tanzania, it's very easy to get access to those products. All you have to do is put on a little front or act like you want to get some creams, even if it's not on the front counter. You just ask for it, pretend like you're trying to be light, and they'll screen you, figure out if you're really telling the truth, and then go to the back counter and get some creams for you. So intrapsychically, as a psychologist, I'm very interested in the psychology behind why this is happening, and how this has an impact on us as a people. So intrapsychically, there's a lot of theories that talk about how this has an impact on different aspects of our psychology, our self-esteem, our self-concept, our identity. And so there's a number of different consequences that happen. And there's consequences that happen from engaging in the practice, and then there's consequences that happen from having a desire to be liked, to engage, and to actually engage in the practice, okay? And so the sense of inferiority that's been perpetuated over and over and over for centuries it just plays out in this desire to be light and to actually engage in practices that will allow you to be that way. So skin complexion having an impact on the self-esteem, having an impact on the self-concept, once again, causing you to look at your skin complexion and want to do something different to change it, right? All right, so psychologically, individuals often internalize the socialized values and attitudes and incorporate them into their own sense of self. This results in things like internalized racism, objectification, and then behaviorally, actually engaging in the practice of skin bleaching. So where do we go from here? I'm just going to briefly talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing. Like I said, we've spent years really trying to understand the motivations behind why people do this, what the Tanzanian government is doing to make changes about this practice. We've looked at who is actually doing it, where they're doing it, how they're doing it. And so now we're at a point where we're looking at preventative strategies. How do we work with the community to prevent the practice? There's actually several agencies in Tanzania that are working themselves to prevent the practice. The Tanzania Food and Drug Authority is one, who we have partnerships with. The many university and medical hospitals in Tanzania are some of the other agencies that are trying to prevent this practice. And so one of the challenges, though, is that they put bans in place. So for example, in 2003, they put the initial ban in place to prevent this practice. And then they created new lists of all of the banned products. Okay, but first of all, they don't have enough regulators to go out to the shops and go undercover to regulate who is doing this and who isn't. And then the other thing is they aren't producing updated lists fast enough to to keep up with all of the new products that are coming out. So just like in the drug industry, with crack or cocaine or one of these illicit substances, they're always coming out with new drugs. Same thing with skin bleaching products. So if you're not updating those lists like weekly, people will come out with new products and then they can argue, well, my product's not on the list, so I can sell it. All right, so that's creating a lot of challenge. So there's a need for more regulated policy change. There's a need for more, there's a need for psychosocial interventions, and there's a need for different types of educational interventions, all of which we are beginning to work on. So I'm going to stop my talk here. What I want to do is just share with you, Solette, if you could come up here for a minute. I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to share with you about our expeditions that we have in Africa. We started off our expedition as a study abroad program for Tanzanians, for students, for university students at Georgia State and other institutions. But now we have opened it up to the general public because we've gotten a lot of interest from working professionals, from retirees, from adolescents that have an interest in going to Africa. Okay, and so the trip for students, if you're trying to go for course credit, is called, the actual class is called the Psychology of Beauty or the Psychology of Skin Bleaching in Tanzania. If you're going as a working professional, you have no interest in taking a class. You just want to go to Africa and experience the culture and just sort of learn about a lot of the stuff that I've been telling you about, then the name of the trip is called Explore Your Senses, and it's focused on the history and culture of Tanzania. And so I'm going to just quickly tell you what we do on the trip, and then I'm going to let Solette, who is the project coordinator and actually went on the trip in 2010, just give you a quick glimpse of what her experience was like. But this trip is designed to expose you to the history and culture of East Africa. You learn all about the East African slave trade, not just based on what I'm telling you, but we actually go to all of the sites that I've been talking about. We go to the markets where the enslaved were sold. We go to the caravans where they were stored before they were shipped off into slavery. We go to Zanzibar, and you learn all about the Arabs as enslavers. We go up north to the northern part of Tanzania near to Kenya, and you learn all about the Germans as colonizers. We have a 3-day safari that's built into the trip. We go to the Serengeti, Ngorongoro Crater, Lake Manyara. We visit the Maasai people, and this is a picture on the cover of the Maasai people. The Maasai are one of the only ethnic groups in Tanzania that have managed to resist the colonial influences. All these colonial influences that I've been talking to y'all about have been managed to be resisted by the Maasai people. They're one of over 200 different ethnic groups in Tanzania. And so they live off of the land. They're warriors. They live out there in the bush, right in the Serengeti. They're trained warriors. They live in the same area where the lions and all of the wild animals are, but they are able to live out there with, amongst the animals and just, live off of the land. They're nomads, they're herders, and just learning about their culture and their lifestyle, how they build their homes, and I mean, it's just amazing. It's really fascinating.